kind of feel like the EFF is running out of ideas, and this includes Julius Malema, who I used to think was one of the smartest, most charismatic politicians in South Africa, if not the most ethical one. But now I'm like, this is not very smart what you're doing. Let's rewind. So, Julius Malema was responding to Cyril Ramaphosa's opening of Parliament address. It used to be called SONA, the kind of annual speech the president gives. He gives it again after he's elected. It's like the second SONA, but now it's called the opening of Parliament address. So, Malema was responding to Ramaphosa's speech. Now, Ramaphosa's speech was significant only in that he had like 70% of Parliament behind him for the first time ever because of the Government of National Unity. And for the first time in like 30 years, the DA were like applauding Ramaphosa and smiling because they're part of his government now. And so the actual speech itself, there wasn't anything really major. It was, him setting out the priorities of the new administration, saying all the things he should say about economic growth and corruption, cutting down on corruption and so on. So what happens is that after the president gives his State of the Nation address or the opening of Parliament address, where he's setting out sort of his strategy for the year or the administration, opposition parties debate his speech the next day. So that happened on Friday, and Malema just went a little bit crazy, guys. He basically accused Cyril Ramaphosa of having been an apartheid-era collaborator. If you know your history, Cyril Ramaphosa was one of the founders of the National Union of Mine Workers in the early 80s when Malema was all of 1 year old. And they did form this union by sort of going door to door, convincing mine workers to join up for like 50 cents subscription fee. But Malema now goes and accuses Ramaphosa of saying that white capital founded the NUM. The NUM, which is one of the backbones of organized labor in this country, which contributed to the overthrow of apartheid. He tried to spin the narrative to say that, no, actually, the Oppenheimers, who of course owned Anglo and all of that, funded the founding of the NUM, the National Union of Mine Workers, in order to create a conveyor belt of exploited mine workers for miners to use. And they went on to say that was why Ramaphosa was insulated from the kind of like worst conditions of apartheid, where all his comrades were being sent to prison, he was going to university. So they just make up this whole narrative that is just not supported by fact. There's a lot you can say about how labor across the world, kind of gets closer and closer to power, to the people they're negotiating with on behalf of workers, and they do end up becoming part of that elite, right? That is a legitimate criticism, but then to just literally make up stories about how the NUM was funded by Oppenheimers when that is just not supported by fact, and the actual history is so well documented of how painstakingly they put that union together and how it really was on the right side of history. So Malema goes on and on talking about how Ramaphosa sold out his comrades, trying to just rewrite struggle history. And what's interesting about this is that Natasha Merriman at News 24 says he's basically taking a page out of the kind of Gupta Bell Pottinger playbook, which is to just keep repeating a lie until enough people accept it as truth. So he's part of this thing called the Progressive Alliance, and it's got people like the MK who are part of it, who have even less principles than the EFF, because they just flat out lie, right? And the MK party, of course, helmed by former President Jacob Zuma, who hates Ramaphosa, absolutely hates him. They were nemesis. Zuma got ousted by Ramaphosa. So you see Zuma's daughter, Dudu, tweeting also about how Ramaphosa was some kind of apartheid-era sellout, spreading all these wild rumors about how he was being paid by the apartheid government, how they were sponsoring his life, just nothing that's actually supported by fact, but similar to the kind of white monopoly capital and the kind of larger Bell Pottinger playbook that happened to try to shield the Guptas from accountability back in the day during state capture. This is just basically just repeating wild accusations until enough people believe it. And the crux of this, the reason they're doing this, is because of the ANC being in coalition with the DA. So you saw former Judge John Hlophe, former disgraced Judge John Hlophe, standing up as the leader of the opposition and saying, how could you go into government with the DA? How could you sell this to the country? And Malema also really pushing that idea, how like that Ramaphosa. So Malema's trying to create this idea that Ramaphosa has been a sellout during apartheid because of his work with the apartheid regime, apparently, and that he's a sellout now. So he's trying to draw a line from then to now saying that Ramaphosa is selling out the people by going into coalition with the DA, right? That's his whole thesis. Like Ramaphosa and the ANC under Ramaphosa are sellouts, and they keep selling out to white monopoly capital. But here's the thing. Malema went into coalition with the DA way before the ANC did. After the last local government elections, when no one had a clear majority in many of the metros in Gauteng, including Johannesburg and Pretoria and Ekurhuleni, the EFF basically forced the DA into a coalition with them by voting them into power. And they even surprised them. The DA weren't expecting it. They said it wasn't a coalition, but it's confidence in supply. They basically voted in the mayors, and they voted for the DA's budget. They then caused nonsense afterwards and switched sides, but they were the first ones to go into coalition with the DA before the ANC. But now they want to turn around and say, no, you guys are the sellout. And this is what Fikile Mbalula pointed out on Saturday at a press briefing. Anyway, so on Monday, Ramaphosa then gets to respond to everyone who responded to his address on Thursday. It's just like a whole bunch of responses to the original speech. And he kind of just schooled Malema. Look, Ramaphosa has his failings, but he's come out looking really good. Malema's come out looking really bad, because Ramaphosa basically was almost took the higher road and said to him, I think you need to read some history books. I think we'd like to sit down and talk to you about what really happened back then. And then he said, waar was jy? Right? Like, where were you in Afrikaans? He actually responded to him off script, because, you know, the media get the speech. And he just responds to him in like 4 different languages off script, saying like, where were you? Can we help you understand our history? Because every time you talk about our history, it kind of feels to us that you don't actually know what you're talking about. Ouchie! Very gracious, like typical Ramaphosa, doesn't get personal, doesn't like go below the belt, but just kind of like sets him right. And to be honest, the EFF on such a back foot. They have declined to 9%. People are saying they've hit a national ceiling for this kind of radical politics. They've been displaced by the MK party, which is a whole other story, but it feels like they're running out of ideas, because Malema basically said he wants to stop doing this whole thing where they, disrupt parliament. They want to move on and become more mature and be better opposition. Was this his idea of being better opposition? Because honestly, it really was not that compelling. Like, we need a real opposition. We need people who are actually going to debate. We don't need people who are going to, as Ramaphosa quite correctly said, play the man and not the ball. There are real things that the government of national unity need to be held account for. The DA were in opposition for 30 years, guys, since Tony Leon. They perfected the art. I mean, they're an irritating party, but they're pretty good at oversight. Now we have a situation with opposition. It's just getting personal all the time. They're not holding the GNU to account on all the many things that they should be held to account on, right? Because there are a lot of those things. They're not holding them to account on the budget, how they're spending their budget, on how is legislation being passed, is it being passed well, what are the policies being put through. Like, you're attacking him for something that you're saying that happened 30 years ago that is easily provable that did not happen. You have limited time to make your point in parliament, and you're using it to spread lies instead of holding government to account, which is what we need you to do as opposition. Do your damn job and stop indulging in fiction that is not going to get you anywhere, and it's not going to arrest your decline as a party.